Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's continue implementing the CoreUI. I would like to add some properties to this CoreUI, more specifically the design time resources, only for design purposes. And the CoreUI creates a new folder, let's call it properties. It is a reserved name. Add a new resource dictionary, let's call it design time resources. In this file, it's going to be very simple. We're going to merge the dictionary pocket goods theme under this particular file. We're going to see that once we implement, for example, some reusable components. Let's come back to the font folder, and I would like to add here the font resource to define Lato regular, where to load this font family, as well as Lato italic and Lato bold. Add a new class. Let's call it font resource. Public static class. We have to use the URI. It's going to be read only and font family. Try to use system, Windows, and media. Let's call it Lato regular. There's gonna be a CoreUI component location of this Lato regular. Let's add italic and bold. That's pretty much it for this class. Since we need the animation, I'm gonna add the animations that will be used in this tutorial by defining with the same manner a class animation resource. The three Lutty animations for animated background and zero purchase and discount offers. And to access the code behind the animations, we have to access this file from this particular URI. And later on, I'm going to add those under the CoreUI definition of our module. Now, the last thing that we have to add here is the images under the assets folder, basically the SVG files and its dedicated class to load dynamically the resource file. Those are all the SVG files that we have used in other apps. And if you want to access, for example, information icon, we're going to access this particular SVG file by using image resources and information in order just to avoid typos and to avoid hard coding the location of or the URI for the SVG file. Now we have to add the images as well as the animations under the definition of the CoreUI file. Underneath this item group, I'm going to include everything inside images that has this extension SVG, as well as everything that has the extension .json under animation. Save the file, and we are good to go. Next, we're going to define the string resource, all right? So we don't have to hard code all messages and whatnot, as we have done in other apps. Inside the CoreUI, create a new folder. Let's call it local. Add new item resource file. Let's name it string resource, why not? And hit add. It will generate the code behind as well as the key value. Those are all the string resource that we're gonna use in our projects. Download the dedicated branch for this project, open it with Notepad or whatever, and copy the content, and open this one with Notepad and copy the content here. And the whole thing is gonna appear under this designer. I just wanna make sure that it has auto-generated everything. I think that we have to build the solution. Of course, this should be right here. All right, let's build the project. I think that we have just to save the file, and it has to auto-generate the file, I guess. Let's check if we have the, all right, it has been auto-generated because I see that the size of the file is has changed. And we have the accessibility identifier image, so we have the correct string resource. All right. Let's create under CoreUI a new folder. Let's call it util. Now under this project, we're going to proceed with the state hoisting. We're going to hoist the states as well as the bindings. In order to achieve this objective, I have come up with an idea actually because it's not straightforward. I'm going to create a reusable method that's going to create a binding between two dependency objects using dependency property references. Create a new class. Let's call it binding maker. We need as a first parameter the object that will receive the binding. For example, the UI control. It's going to be of type dependency object. Let's call it target. The second argument should be the source. It is the property on the target object to bind to. For example, the text property of a text box. It's going to be of type dependency object. Let's call it source. The third dependency, it's the object that provides the data. It's going to be of type dependency property. Let's call it source property. And we need the binding mode. If you are familiar with the WPF, how to define the updates direction. Let's do here by default updates both source and target. And we have to define the update source trigger, which is an optional parameter. Let's assign it. The default one should be when property changes. You can do something else if you will. First, we have to create a new binding object. It's going to be of type binding. Let's name it binding. This binding maker is going to be very helpful under the login form as well as the register form, because it's going to hoist the states and it's not going to be straightforward as you normally would under Jetpack Compose or Swift. We're going to see that once we get to that bridge. We have to do here the source, set the source objects, and we have to set the path from source. And you have to assign the mode, and we have to do here update source trigger. We just hoisted the properties. Afterward, we have to apply binding to the target object's specified property. By doing binding as shown here, binding operation and set binding, we have to provide as an argument the target, and instead it should be target property instead of source property. I think that we have forgot another parameter. After the target, we have to add here target property, and here it should be target and target property, because we want to apply binding to the target object specified property. And that's pretty much it. We're gonna overload this function by creating the same method to create a binding using source object and property name as a string. We have to create the binding object, and we have to set here the path from source property name that we have used here and the objects. All right, it's gonna be very similar. For the path, it's gonna be source property name, and for the source, it is an object. Next, we have to apply the binding to the target object specified property. By using this particular class, binding maker, we're going to be able to hoist the state. In the same scope of state hoisting, we need to implement class that's going to allow us to bind a synchronous action to the UI controls. It has to implement the interface I command. I'm going to create here a private member. It's going to store the asynchronous action to execute when the command is invoked, and another one for can execute an optional function to determine if the command can execute. And if you are familiar with WPF, this is a normal thing to do. Next, you have to provide the constructor that's going to initialize the command with the action to execute and the optional parameter can execute predicate. That's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to change this syntax because it's very simple. Can execute it, and it's very awesome again. Can execute and invoke and true with the same manner. And we have to use here the event handler when ability of the command to execute changes to re-query can execute. For reusability purposes, I would like to define the navigation data. It is a record that's going to contain the navigation service and the related data. It's going to be sealed record. A generic type for the data, for the first field, data of type T, and the navigation service from Windows and navigation. In order to save some time, I'm going to provide the constants for the UI that will be used across different sections of our app. Nothing substantial in order not to hard code the keys of the strings. Basically going to access those keys under testing and under the UI and the code behind if we ever need that. The last thing that we're going to do here under the util package is the utility functions related to UI. I'm going to call it UI helper. I have to introduce something which is very important. If you are not familiar with WPF, we're going to deal with converters. Sometimes we need to extract hex color from a given string. Therefore, I'm going to create a function here that's going to give us from the string input, we're going to get the hex color from a given string. We'll try to access every character in the input. We have to hash basically the string by doing, first of all, before doing that, we have to initialize the hashing value, which is integer, 0 initially. The hashing value, it is the character as shown here. I don't know why it reads my mind. This is basically a shortcut for a hashing technique. It's going to shift the hash left by 5 bytes, and it's going to subtract original hash and add the current character. It's going to produce some kind of evenly distributed hash for different strings. Next, we have to initialize the hex color string with the hashtag. Next, we have to use the hash to generate the RGB values. Okay, I think it's correct. This is exactly what I want to do, which is very awesome, very helpful. And at the end, we're going to return the color builder and toString. We have implemented the string avatar in other tutorials. Let's do this under this application. First of all, we're going to split the words by space. Next, we're going to handle empty or null names by returning an empty string. Next, we're going to split the name into words. All right, let's see the proposition. All right, it's fine. I'm going to train. Let's see if it's going to figure out the rest. Next, we have to check if the length equals 0. If the length of this name parts is 0, we're going to return an empty string, no valid words. And if it's 1, I guess it's correct. We're going to return only one word provided. I accept this proposition. I'm going to return here just the first letter capitalized. Otherwise, it's going to combine the first letters of the first two words and convert to uppercase. I would like to add a convenient method here that's going to capitalize in a generic manner a string. Let's call it capitalized, and it's going to give us a string. System, globalization, culture info, current culture, text info, and to title case, and you have to provide here S to lowercase. All right, now we are done basically with the util package. If you do remember, in the other apps, we have handled the media query. And in WPF, in order to handle or to make your application responsive, it's not straightforward and it's not out of the box. And we're gonna handle this by concepts under WPF called behaviors. Therefore, I'm gonna store all the behaviors for our application under this particular folder. I'm gonna call it behavior. A new behavior, I'm gonna call it media query. Let's start defining the breaking points under the media query. Create a new class. Let's call it breaking point. It's gonna be a public static class. Let's see the proposition of Visual Studio. Instead of this, I'm gonna force the double value. Now I would like to add here the visual properties. What I mean with that, let's say for example we want to show some elements. The window is under a small window or small screen. I'm going to show an element or to hide that particular element. Therefore, I'm going to create an enum that's going to handle this for us. Let's call it visual property. We distinguish between properties of the UI. For example, we want to control the visibility. Let's add this case. Let's say, for example, we want to control the width, or let's say, for example, the horizontal alignment. Now we are ready to implement the media query. I think that you're going to like it. In this class, media query, I'm going to define an attached property for the visual property to be manipulated based on screen size. To declare an attached property, anyway, I'm going to click on this and hit tab. The name of this attached property, target property, and hit tab. We have the target property. For the type of this particular one, it has to be of type visual property. Hit tab to define the next. The next one is of type, which is the media query. The current class, basically it's going to get the target property, to set the target property, and to define the target property. And for default value, I don't want to do this. Let's say with default value, it's going to be for visibility. And whenever this media query changes, we need to attach a callback function. I'm going to create it later on. Now we need to define another attached property for the screen. Let's call it on small screen. Basically, we want to do some stuff or to change some stuff whenever we are on a small screen. And as a default, by doing starts means no changes. And here on media query change, what we have to do, I'm going to create this function with the same manner. Let's try to define another attached property, what the developer is willing to do under medium screen and large screen and extra large screen. I'm going to add some comments here to distinguish between the other cases. Now we have to define the callback function. Whenever any attached property changes, what we have to do. Now I'm going to create a private function that's going to update the element based on the window width, as well as the assigned visual property. Update UI elements. We need to access basically the window and the framework element. Let's call it element. We can't get the current width of the window. Let's store it under window width. Now we have to check with the property to update and get target property. For the first case, if we are interested to update the visibility, I'm going to add here break. And I'm going to add a to-do because it's going to be implemented later on. Next, if you are talking about the property width, in case of horizontal alignment, with the same manner, we will create an individual private functions for each case. Let's define, for example, for the visibility, we need two parameters. The screen width element or the UI element, it is of type framework element. Let's call it element. We have to determine, first of all, the value of the current screen size based on the breaking point. I'm going to define it or implement it as a reusable function. I'm going to call it getResponsiveValue. And we have to pass here the window width as well as the UI elements and the default value for each case. In case, for example, on small screen, to call the function getOnSmallScreen, and you have to pass here as an argument the UI element. Likewise, for the other case, I'm going to get the UI element, or you can just name this function, if you will, getUI_element. With the same manner, going to define the other cases. And let's come back to the update element visibility. Okay, I think it is misleading, this title. It has to be get dependency property, something like this, because we are going to get the value by the dependency property objects. You can name it get value by dependency property object. Anyway, it's going to be used here under update element visibility. We have to set the visibility according to the value. In order to make this function reusable, I'm going to create it as a private function. It's going to convert basically a string to visibility enum. If the visibility is null or white space, we're going to return visible. In case if we have provided under the example file something like visible, in this case, we're going to return visibility and visible. With the same manner, if we have provided hidden and collapsed, we're going to use visibility and hidden or visibility and collapsed. And for the default one, it's going to be visible. Now let's come back to the implementation of update element visibility. Here we're going to do to visibility, and we have to pass as an argument the value, whatever stuff that you're going to assign in the XAML file to update the width property of this particular element. First of all, we're going to get or to determine the responsive value that we have used earlier. Assign the star value for the width. It is a common practice under WPF. What I have to do here is to convert the string to actual width in pixel. Let's implement it as a reusable function. Let's call it to pixel value. As usual, we're gonna check that the value is not null or white space. In this case, if it is null or white space, we're gonna return null. Let's trim the value, and we have to check if the value equal to star, which is the default one, or 100%, we're gonna return null. Not gonna do anything here. Next, if we have provided a percentage based width, let's check this value. If it ends basically with this particular percentage and the double value, let's try to parse this particular value by doing try parse, and let's store it under %. In this case, we're gonna return this value. We're gonna take what we have before the percentage. Basically, we're gonna take the percentage according to screen width. Now, if the string ends with pixels, we have to get the pixel value. Instead of 1, it should be 2 because we do have 2 characters here. If it is different than numeric value, we're gonna return the raw value by parsing the double. And if it's not neither percentage or pixels, we're gonna return null. We have to call to pixel and pass value and screen width. Next, we have to apply the width to the elements. But before that, we need to check if the parse width has value. In this case, we're gonna assign the new width to the UI element from the parse width and value, all right? Because it's nullable. Otherwise, we're going to reset the width if invalid by doing elements and clear value, framework element and width property to reset the width if invalid. The only thing that we have to do here is to update the horizontal alignment. With the same manner, let's get the value by dependency property object. And next, I'm gonna convert the string to enum, horizontal alignment. Let's create this function. And if we do have the value, we're going to assign the new value to the UI element by applying the new alignment by doing element and horizontal alignment equal alignment. As simple as this. Now we have to implement this to horizontal alignment from the string. With the same manner, we have to check if the string is null or empty or is null or white space. In this case, we're going to assign the default one, which is left horizontal alignment. Next, we have to trim the value and to convert it to lowercase to make it consistent. And we're going to switch over the value in case if we have assigned under the XAML file left, we're going to do horizontal alignment and left, if center, center, and if right, right, if it's stretch, stretch. As simple as this. Now we have implemented all the necessary functionalities. Let's come back to the main function, which is update UI element. In this case, what we have to do, we're going to call update UI element and visibility and so on for the rest of the cases. Now we have to implement on media query change to apply update UI element whenever this dependency property changes. First of all, we have to check and to ensure the object is a UI element. If it's not a UI element, we're not going to do anything, to be honest. Next, we need to find the parent window, which is very important. Let's store it under window. Let's call it window. We can access the parent window by doing window and get window. And we have to provide here the element to find the parent window. All right. Now we have to attach a handler to load event. Whenever this component is ready, let's attach an event. We don't care actually about the parameters. We're going to retrieve the window again if it's not null, and otherwise what we have to do. All right, if it's not null, we're going to start tracking the size changes. I'm going to make it as a private function for this purpose. And we have to do here the same thing under window as we have done here. Start tracking the window size. Otherwise, window already exists. We have to start tracking immediately. All right, in order not to repeat the same process here and here, let's call this particular event handler hook window size changed. It's going to be private function, window size changed. We're just going to call and update on every size changes by calling update UI elements by providing basically the window and the element. As soon as we create the window, we're going to update initially the elements by copying this. This is going to serve initial updates. And here, if it is null, we're going to hook Windows size changed. And that's pretty much it for the implementation for the media query. It is very helpful, and we're going to see that once we're going to define the layout of our application. And that's pretty much it for all the stuff that we're going to need in this application. Now we have to get ready for the next tutorial because we're going to define the reusable components, and we have to dive deeper in WPF and its foolishness and its medieval style to define the components. I hope you have learned something new. See you in the next one, and happy coding.